Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my guide to the Minstrel's Ballad Sphene's Burden, or Sphene Extreme if you prefer. This extreme trial can be unlocked from the Wandering Minstrel in Tuliolal after completing the 7.0 main scenario quests. It drops item level 725 weapons as well as the usual bonus loots that come with every extreme trial. You know, mounts, crafting items, the usual. This fight has some pretty puzzling mechanics, but it isn't too bad now that it's solved. To skip to a specific mechanic, please use the timestamps in the description of the video. Also, please note, I'm basically putting this out day 1, maybe day 2, so strats in the party finder may change. Focus on understanding how the fight works so you can adjust to whatever the party finder finally lands on. At the start of the fight, I recommend assigning light parties with spread positions like you see in this image. In our clear, we had DPS spreading to the north side of this image and supports to the south, but this is the kind of thing PF might do differently, so be ready. We also had 4 and 8 player conga line positions, as you see here, used for specific mechanics later in the fight. Oh, and yes, the edge of the arena is death, whether to gravity or other mechanics later. On pull, make sure that both tanks are top 2 in aggro. The boss will do double autos with 1 on each tank. If a tank dies, they should provoke as soon as they get up in order to get back to top 2 aggro. The first mechanic is Aethertithe. This will cause the party to take moderate damage every second, while the boss does 3 back-to-back conal AoEs just like in normal mode. You can see the warped ground indicating where these AoEs will hit, though the warped ground is actually a little bigger than the AoE itself. Now on Extreme, after each conal AoE, the boss will fire a line AoE at both healers, dealing heavy damage split between every player hit. We have Group 1 on the left side of the room and Group 2 on the right side. If an AoE is covering the left or right side of the room, that group simply shifts over to the middle of the room for their dodge and stack. If the cone from the boss is going through the middle, then both light parties ensure they're just on their respective sides of it. Be sure to have decent mitigation for this and watch your shields because they are being stripped away by the tithe non-stop. The next mechanic is Virtual Shift. This will deal heavy damage to the party and enter the wind phase, while pulling the entire party onto the center of the new X-shaped platform. Immediately break into light parties and position yourself northwest and southeast as you see here, between the 2 parallel platforms. Each healer will get a split damage AoE called an Arrow Quell to soak and mitt with the light parties. This will also leave behind a wind puddle that you'll need to avoid for the rest of the phase. The Arrow Quells will also give everyone a debuff, either East Wind of Change or West Wind of Change. When this debuff wears off, it will knock the player directly east or west, basically in the direction the arrow over your head is showing you or the direction of the arrows on the debuff itself. At the end of the duration, ensure you're on the correct side of one of the 2 horizontal lines to get knocked around safely. Once the stacks go off, have everyone go center for chains. Each DPS will be chained to a support. So once the chain debuff actually appears on your bar, we had DPS run northeast and supports run southwest, using the pathways that aren't blocked by the wind AoEs. The boss will shortly after begin charging Legitimate Force, a back-to-back half-room AoE. Look for the hand that gets raised up first and dodge that before dodging whichever one was raised second. This attack is not lethal, mind you, and it's generally advised not to risk dying to solve it if you don't have to. That's not important here, it's easy here, but later on there's a mechanic that you may have to make some harder decisions on. While dodging Legitimate Force, think about your winds of change. You may have just 2 or 3 seconds to get into a safe spot after that second fist, if your debuff requires you to be on that side. So sprint really helps here when your debuff falls under 10 seconds. Once the winds are settled, mitigate the World Shatter Raid-wide, which will also reset the arena back to normal. After this is a 2-hit Tank Buster. You can choose to invuln these or simply tank swap them. I personally think it's better to tank swap them. You could home gang this first one and then have home gang back for later, but I'll explain why I prefer you not to tank invuln these when we get to a little bit later in the video. Next is Divide and Conquer. This attack will fire a line AoE at every player 1 at a time. After all 8 go off, the AoEs will then repeat a second time in the exact same spot, so you'll just need to stand out of them that time. This is what we used that 8-player conga line I showed at the start. We just did DPS tank healer from the edge of the arena inward with Group 1 on the left and Group 2 on the right, like I have on the screen right now. This isn't essential, but it's not a movement-heavy mechanic regardless. We just sidestep our individual AoEs after they go off with the space in between them. Though you can also attempt to just leave a big old empty space middle and go there. My only recommendation here otherwise is to get kind of close to the boss without being hit by an overlapping AoE. 2-minute buffs go out during this, so if everyone's all the way on the outside, you will miss buffs from the other side of the room, and you don't want that. The other solution is to put the DPS all closer to the middle of the room, but it's still probably a better idea for everyone to step in. There's a quick raid wide here called Royal Domain. You'll see a few of these throughout the fight, and anytime you see it casting, just needs mitten heals. Next is another virtual shift, this time to the Earth phase. Players will be split onto 2 separate platforms and be given a gravity well in the middle of each of them. Stepping into the gravity well will raise you off the ground if you're on the platform, or lower you back down to it if you're in the air. You can do this infinitely, so get ready to dance around a bit. First, have everyone go into the air immediately and walk to the center of the room. You'll have 2 legitimate forces to deal with, after which there will be 4 Earth towers on each platform. We just had Group 1 handle the west platform and Group 2 handle the east. We also used those spreads from earlier with the DPS on the north side and the support south. I'll put it on the screen again right here. Again, this isn't integral so long as there is 1 person in each tower, but it made sense for a specific strat where we repeat this type of assignment later for consistency. Once the towers are soaked, 2 random players on each platform will be targeted with an attack. 1 player will be tethered with a prey marker, the other is given a big ol' AoE. These 2 players should go into the air via the gravity well in order to position. The tether should run towards the front of the room off to the side, while the player with the AoE just sidesteps towards the edge of the arena, also while in the air. Please note that the edge is still lethal here, so do not touch the edge of the arena itself. The remaining 2 players will get 2 towers on the platform. Ensure they are ground level for these and not in the air. We had a loose spread with the leftmost unmarked player getting the front tower and the rightmost unmarked player getting the back tower. Or at least that was the plan. You know, we were ecstatic, so we YOLO'd sometimes, but that's a plan that works. There's plenty of time here though, so don't worry about it too much. Now, after all of those attacks go off, everyone should be airbound as it makes the movement for the next mechanic much smoother. All 8 players will be targeted with meteor drops. Each hit will leave a meteor behind if dropped on a platform, dealing some splash damage in the process if anyone else is too close. Don't be, by the way. However, if a meteor is dropped off the sides while you're airborne, it won't do the big AoE splash. It'll just hit the player and then pass through and not land on any ground. Now, we're going to need 4 meteors on each platform for the next mechanic. For the first set, while airborne, we set up this L formation on the platform, going melee range tank in a row with the healer off to the side of the tank, as you see here. Don't worry about the AoEs actually overlapping. The meteors basically need to be almost on top of each other to explode, so you can actually do what you're seeing here. Obviously, I'm putting it in the guide so it works. After these hit the arena, stay airborne and just drop the second set off to the side. Note that these meteors hit hard, even when you're off the arena and dropping them into the abyss, so ensure there's decent mit and some healing between each hit. Once the second set of meteors are thrown off the sides, light parties should return to their respective platforms and return to the ground. At this point, the boss will begin casting Weighty Blow. This will target a random player on the platform and attempt to hit them with a lethal attack. However, standing just barely behind a meteor will cause the meteor to block the hit and explode. We just started from the frontmost meteor and, as a team, walked backwards into each meteor to blow up all 4 on each side. The reason we use the L shape here is because if we put the final meteor in a direct line to the back of the platform, it could just make getting behind it a bit spottier. So we eliminated that by putting the meteor to the side. If there are any meteors remaining on the platforms when the World Shatter cast comes out and the arena goes back to normal, it's going to explode and you're not going to be very happy. After that World Shatter and another set of tank busters will be the Coronation mechanic. This will summon 4 line AoEs, each tethering to 2 players. These players can then move the AoE, with its movement based on the lateral or longitudinal distance the tether players are from it. Don't worry, you don't have to think about any of that, because we have some nice easy positions for you. Each player, simply look at the line AoE you're tethered to. If you're tethered to the left side of it, stand directly on the cardinal that line AoE started on. So if you're the left tether on the northern AoE, stand directly north, east to east, etc. If you're the player tethered to the right side of the AoE, go to the corner clockwise of it. So the right side of the north AoE would go to the northeast corner, the east AoE to the southeast, etc., etc. This will safely dodge every line AoE. After which, every player is also going to get a large spread marker, but you'll already be spread out with these positions as well. Just ensure every player is topped off, and this should resolve easy peasy. Next is Absolute Authority. Upon the skill being cast, one role will be given 4 flare debuffs and one player on the other role a split damage AoE. Your goal is to put the flares in the corners of the arena and have any non-flares meet in the middle for the stack AoE. Now, while I am going to detail what I think is the intended strategy for the mechanic, there is just one really easy way to solve it that just requires a bit more raid mint. So the split damage AoE doesn't give a magic vuln, so you can actually stack all 4 flare markers in the split damage AoE, move together as a group, and then with just a decent amount of raid mint, you can just survive, and then you don't have to do all the movement I'm going to describe to you as what I think was the intended method. I think PF is probably going to land on this because it doesn't require a crazy amount of mint, but in the off chance that PF doesn't just go for this stack everyone version of the mechanic, I'm also going to detail it and show you the normal way. I don't know what they'll do, but at the very least, here's both of them. We started everyone dead center, with melees and tanks going toward the boss while the ranged and healers went back, dropping baited AoEs all along the way. Group 1 players will then split off and go west once they're comfortably towards the edge of the platform, while Group 2 players go east. Now the flares should get in the corner while the non-flares all head to the middle once you do this split up. Once the flares and stack AoE go off, every player will have an isolation AoE over their head, meaning you need to stand on at least one other player to prevent the effects. In order to make it easier for the flares, we just had the melee and ranged group each meet up halfway between the middle of the room and their respective partner's flare. So the Group 1 melee and tank would meet up midway, Group 1 range and healer. You can see me doing it on the screen right here. Obviously, if you have triple melee, triple range, just agree on positioning ahead of time for this. After that's going to be a knockback coming from the north side of the room. Everyone could just step up to avoid this, but you can also knockback resist it, so do whichever you want. Now we're on to the last major mechanic of this phase, the Ice Mode Virtual Shift. This will start all of the players on a narrow middle platform. Here, we immediately break up into DPS forward and supports towards the back, and make a short lineup of D1 through D4 from left to right, and main tank, off tank, H1 and H2 left to right in the back. Law of Ice will force the player to keep moving until the ice debuff on them goes away, which jumping in place satisfies just fine. It will also form 4 ice bridges. These bridges can only support 1 player at a time, so you'll need to carefully cross them one at a time to solve the next mechanic in a timely fashion. They won't come back until Law of Ice is cast again if they break, so be careful. Once Law of Ice finishes, 8 icicles will also appear around the room, 4 in the back and 2 on each side, east and west. The 4 back icicles will tether to one of the rolls first, before the second set targets the other roll. Your goal is to get far away from the icicle and stretch out the tether until it changes to be safe. Failure to do so will cause that player to be knocked off, and if a player dies before the icicle is resolved, that icicle will do a giant explosion around it when the tethers go off instead. Now, to carefully help navigate crossing the bridges, we set up a priority system. With the DPS forward and supports back, you'll never share a potential bridge cross with more than a single other player for the duration of this mechanic. So the DPS for this first cross only use the front bridges, and the supports only use the back bridges. Basically, the player closest to the bridge they need to cross crosses first, and the player furthest from it crosses second. So let's say the leftmost DPS needs to stretch their tether to the west. They can cross immediately once they've recognized this fact because they're the closest to that bridge, while the other player just has to watch them cross before going themselves. But if that leftmost player had to cross to the east, they'd be waiting until somebody else crosses it first. It's a visual clutter that can be difficult to read, honestly, no matter what strat you choose. So getting used to identifying the icicle you're tethered to helps a lot here. Once you cross, you'll want your spread to look like this diagram. You can technically cross the icicles that are parallel to each other east and west, but it's fine to just stretch them and take a few steps to the side to avoid that icicle's path. As soon as the icicle is resolved, the players who solve the east and west icicles should cross back to the middle across the closest bridge. Then, the players who had to stretch to the far north can either take turns with the northmost platform, with the player closest to the middle crossing first and the other player crossing second, or the further player can rush all the way to the back of the room with sprint and cross to ensure that there are no traffic jams. You'll need to make it to the middle of the room again to dodge legitimate force, so also get to the correct side once you're there. We had the innermost player, north side, take the north bridge, and the outer player take the south bridge, but quite frankly, that's a lot of running. Remember earlier when I said legitimate force wasn't auto-lethal? If it's safer to take the hit here, then take it instead of focusing on crossing, as you'll just get a vuln stack and you'll live. Healers just need to make sure everyone's close to top tier after the icicles go off. However, you'll want to return to the middle before the next mechanic begins anyway. After another Law of Ice and another motion check, 2 tethers will appear on the party while a split damage AoE targets a healer. The tethers will need to be taken out of the group by 2 players, and when they expire, will do a massive AoE. That AoE doesn't actually deal much damage at all, but it does give those players ice resistance down, and if they're hit by another tether, then it's not going to be a good time. Players with ice resistance down also become the eligible targets for the split damage line AoE in place of the healers. Now, it's intended that you just cycle through all 4 roles here. We had tanks take the first tether, then healers, then melee, then ranged, just so the healers front-loaded their movement and then could heal the rest of this part and the World Shatter AoE afterwards without much worry. We also had a system where the players going to take the next set of tethers would use the inner bridges and the people returning would take the outer, but honestly, there's more than enough time for both people to just use the inner bridges for this entire mechanic. However, you can tank cheese these tethers, even with being targeted by the split line AoE. Use no cooldowns on the first tether hit, and the party should have to deal with the stack. Then you kitchen sink the second hit, and then invuln the last 2 hits. It's about 6 seconds between each tether and the line AoE going off, so they'll want to invuln like 4 or 5 seconds after the second tether hit goes off. Even with the split damage AoE, the damage isn't that severe. It's up to the PF to decide whether doing it normally or tank cheesing is the way to go, but I think you know what they're probably going to land on. Once the World Shatter goes off, there is a series of basic mechanics for about a minute. It's Tank Buster, Raid Wide, Legitimate Force, Raid Wide, and finally, Authority Eternal for the Enrage. This phase lasts about 8 minutes and 5 seconds. If you lower Queen Eternal's HP to under 2%, this phase will end early. However, she will not interrupt a major attack to phase push. So if she's already started Laws of Ice 2 with the tethers and whatnot, you will have to finish that mechanic before she phase pushes, including the World Shatter after. If Queen Eternal's HP is depleted before Authority Eternal is finished casting, it will become a standard raid wide, so just be sure to mitigate it. After a short delay, she will then return for a phase 2. The main mechanic of this phase is Radical Shift. This will summon 2 copies of the various elemental arenas to the east and west of the arena, rotated 90 degrees. The animation for Radical Shift will show the background of the arena behind Queen Eternal, rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. This is indicating which arena Sphene will be changing your platform into. If it's rotating clockwise, then the east arena will take over, and counterclockwise will cause the west arena to take over. You'll be knocked into the air during this, after which a spread AoE will hit every player. So you basically want to figure out which arena it is, spread out for that layout, and then let the spreads hit and make sure you have enough health. It will do a lot of damage. Radical Shift and the AoEs both hit pretty hard, so ensure every single hit here has decent mit and shields. We also did DPS forward and supports back again, though we did like RMTH. Probably should have done MRTH for consistency with the spreads with our Earth Phase Meteors, but just be spreading on the correct platform and you're fine. After 2 Radical Shifts, the boss will do Dimensional Distortion, which is just alternating X's from the front of the room. Avoid the first set, step into them after they're done so you don't get hit by the second set. The team will need to quickly retreat to the south after this to avoid the half-room AoE that the boss is doing, and each tank will need to mitigate a tank damage tower. Group 1 tank take west, Group 2 tank take east. After this, there's just a ton of back-to-back AoEs to mitigate and heal before the arena frees up again. From this point, the fight is on repeat. 2 more Radical Shifts, maybe 1 or 2 more things, then Enrage. Just ensure healing in mid is on point, and this last phase goes very, very quickly. And that's it. That's everything you need to know for Queen Eternal, Sphene Extreme, whatever you want to call it. You know what you clicked the video for in the first place. So, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out my various other videos on 7.1 content. We're going to have guides on all the things that have come out. We are going to be uploading videos on the new Ultimate as I progress through it, and a ton of thoughts, podcasts, Q&As, all my usual stuff. It's going to be a busy season, so it's going to be fun. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.